Good afternoon. To discuss how AI and biotechnology can accelerate discovery, please join me in welcoming Shana Kelley, President of Chan Zuckerberg Biohub Chicago and the Nina B. Swartz Professor at Northwestern University. August Allen, Chief Technology Officer at Enveda, Christina Smolke, CEO of Antheia, and Raphael, Townshend, founder and CEO of Atomic AI. The conversation will be moderated by Alison Snyder.
Okay, good afternoon. Hi everyone, thank you for coming. Thank you to each of you for being here today. They did the hard work and said everybody's names and affiliations, so we'll just sort of hop right into it. I think, there's a lot of excitement around, the intersection of AI and biotech, a lot of investment, a lot of hype, a lot of unknowns. So I'm hoping we can just sort of start with where you all are now and just sort of how you're using AI to accelerate discovery in the broadest sense, or in a very specific sense, in a meaningful way. And maybe I'll just start with you, August, and here we go.
Sure, yeah, thank you. So the company I'm at is called Enveda, and what we're doing is building the first chemical sequencer for life. One of the challenges is that most of chemistry remains undiscovered. Even if you take a commonly studied plant, like even a tomato that we consume every day, only 25% of the molecules in a tomato are known. The remainder are completely undiscovered. It's estimated that less than 1% of the molecules in nature are known. And so what we're doing is leveraging AI and applying that to the field of mass spectrometry, which is a laboratory technique to measure the mass of different molecules in a mixture, and using that to actually predict what all the chemical structures in a mixture are. And so this is letting us uncover a totally new host of chemistry that would never be able to be discovered with traditional approaches that require painstakingly isolating every single molecule physically from a sample, such as a tomato.
Christina?
So at Antheia, we are a pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturer, and we leverage advanced biotechnology and biomanufacturing to be able to make essential medicines in more efficient ways. So discussing how tomatoes or other rare plants actually can make very valuable chemicals, many of our essential medicines that we rely on day to day are currently being extracted from animals and plants. So once those molecules are discovered, actually used as approved drugs, we see that there's huge challenges in how we scale producing them. And so what we're able to do is shift from painstaking sort of extraction of our medicines to something that is more sustainable and more scalable, like brewing medicines with yeast. So that there's a whole technology platform that enables it. One of the areas that we're really excited about in terms of AI is how we can streamline and make more successful the process of scaling the science at the R&D level up through full manufacturing, because that is actually where we see a lot of failures and a lot of iteration, where a lot of the cost goes into actually bringing this to industry. So now that we've launched our first product, we're actually now being able to leverage the data sets that we've built and being able to do that to really look at how can we make the process of scale up to go commercial, more efficient, more successful on the first attempt, and thus really reduce the cost and timelines of bringing these products to the patients.
At Atomic AI,
Hold on a second.
At Atomic AI, basically what we're doing is we're building an AI-driven therapeutics platform. Some of you might be familiar with AlphaFold. That was a team that I worked on a few years back, which was highly accurate prediction of protein structures using cutting-edge AI methods. And the whole idea here is understanding the structures of these molecules gives you a better sense of what they do, and you can enable sort of the intelligent design of new molecules to fix these issues. At Atomic, we're actually taking that approach, this AlphaFold-like approach, and applying it to RNA. So AlphaFold for RNA might be the simplest way of thinking about that, where we're building these foundational data sets in-house at Atomic to enable training these large-scale AI models to crack key problems across the RNA drug discovery landscape.
At the Chan Zuckerberg Biohub in Chicago, we are developing new engineering-based platforms that allow us to study the process of human inflammation. So I'm sure you're all aware, inflammation is a major driver of many, if not most, human diseases. But it's a really difficult thing to study because inflammation results from the action of immune cells, our own immune cells, attacking tissues within the human body. This is a difficult thing to study in a petri dish, If you want to study human inflammation, it's hard to study it in a mouse. So we're creating engineering-based tools that allow us to watch interactions between immune cells and human tissues, listen in on the communication between these different kinds of cells, so that we can learn more about inflammation and discover new ways to turn it around, basically. And where AI comes into play with us is that you can think of the tools and the platforms that we're developing as really differentiated and very powerful mechanisms for data generation for AI. So we are developing large, multimodal, multi-omic data sets describing what happens within human tissues, and we're using those to build models of cells, tissues, different systems that are part of the immune system within the human body.
So I want to follow up just with you to start, and then anybody feel free to jump in. But I think the narrative out there is that AI could put biology and medicine on like a completely new trajectory. What are the milestones that you're particularly looking for, and you can put the time frame on it over the next 5 years, however many years you want to say? But what are the sort of the key milestones for you? Yeah. Yes, Shana, sorry.
Okay, sure. I agree with you 100%. I think that we've really just scratched the surface in terms of what AI can do for biology. For those of us who have kind of been in the trenches, doing biological research, the experiments are slow. It takes a long time to make the breakthroughs. If we can really create the models that recapitulate all of that complexity, we can go from 10% of our work being computational, 90% being really slow and in the lab, and then augment that experimental work with a huge amount of computation. So I think 2 years from now, we will see a really tremendous shift in that many, many more of our experiments will become computational and will be AI driven. And 5 years, I think we will have flipped around in terms of what we do in the lab versus what we do computationally. And that just means everything moves faster. That is my hope, is that we are able to move a lot faster to get to those new interventions that we can use to turn disease around or prevent it entirely.
So what are the milestones to get there? Like the first AI designed small molecule drug, or the first how do you sort of see that unfolding? And anybody can jump in here if you want to, maybe you want to start.
Sure, yeah, I'd say the main thing that is needed in drug discovery is better, cheaper, faster drugs. And the challenge with drug discovery is that what works in the lab often doesn't work in people. And we need to figure out how to better bridge that translational gap with better in silico models, and also with better starting point medicines. So at Enveda, one of the things we're doing is starting with natural products. So medicines that humans have been consuming through plants for thousands of years, and then we're using AI to actually uncover all of those unique molecules in those plants that could make the next aspirin or the next amazing therapeutic.
I'm going to ask Raphael on the drug side, and then I want to ask you a little bit more on the manufacturing side. What's your milestone?
So I like to put on sort of the structural biology hat on all this sort of rational design perspective. And I do think that we're seeing some pretty dramatic progress in terms of our ability to understand sort of from first principles what's going on with at least a limited subset of the therapeutics that we're designing out there. So if I'm thinking about sort of what a milestone could look like there, I think it's really pointing at sort of examples of rational design, like AI-driven rational design actually working well, right, in a conclusive way and getting therapeutics into the clinic, right, along those lines. Because so far, right, I think there's been a lot of promise in that space, but it is a long road, fundamentally.
Go ahead.
Yeah, from a biomanufacturing perspective, and again, returning to some of the comments I made about scale up, there again, it's how do you take a process that you've developed at the R&D scale, maybe operating at 1 liter, and how do you get it to perform robustly at 200,000 liters, 500,000 liters, so you're actually making product for a population, right, as opposed to maybe just a simple a clinical trial. And there I think, what we really want to see move the needle, because again, that's where a lot of the cost comes in, is that you've spent 5 years developing a process and then you take it to scale up and it just doesn't work at all, right? We're seeing 90–95% of the processes actually fail at that stage, and that's really where it's a lot of the cost. So what we would like to see with the AI-driven process is that the success rates go much higher, right? Failures basically go to 0 in terms of that scale up, and the times are likely cut by, over again, 80%, 90% in terms of doing that. Those to me would be really meaningful metrics, and I think are very doable, because to me what these tools really can allow is really identifying what the core parameters are, streamlining, and then really implementing that from the beginning to your design processes.
Do you have an idea of what that success rate is to make it sort of, I guess, yeah.
What it is now, or what
well, both, I guess, yeah. What would you like it to be? What would you like it to be, and then what is it now?
Yeah, I mean, again, and this is, I don't know that there's been anything published on this, but this is just from being in the industry and talking with a lot of companies and also a lot of the manufacturers in terms of what they see at scale up. I think the current success rates in terms of scaling first time, right, without any hindrance in that is pretty slim. It's probably, maybe 5%, 10% of the processes actually do that. I'd say less than 10% actually, if I'm just going based upon what I've heard and learned in the industry. What we'd like it to be at would be over 90, I mean it should be 100%, but over 95%, because again, that is where we see most of the companies fail, right, is that they get it to that point and then they're just stuck in basically the scale up, and that's where really a lot of the cost comes into play. I mean, I see a lot of analogies in terms of the clinical trial path too, which is like, that is really where it's the most expensive part of drug discovery and drug development, is where most things fail, right? You really want to be able to basically address it at that stage, right? But how it impacts the early R&D, as you were saying, right? What molecule scaffolds you start with to give you a better chance of actually going through that process.
So I guess going from there, what are some of the things that you need, right? Like, so is there enough known about biology and enough known about enough biological data to sort of fill in these gaps? Like, what are sort of your greatest needs when you think about those milestones? And maybe we'll start on the end with you, Shana.
Sure. Well, in biology, again, coming back to the idea that we've just scratched the surface, that's because of the data that we have right now to work with, right? We don't have nearly the level of data that has been available to kind of put into other AI models, and so that's the big limiter. And it has to be data that is at the right scale, it has to be data that has the right metadata, it has to have these very specific properties in each data set. And so that's a big thing that the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative is focused on. We've been in the data generation business for quite a while. Some of you may be familiar with Cell by Gene, which is an online database of 100 million cells worth of single cell level data. It's all being curated, it's there. We now have the Billion Cell project that's going, that's kind of the next step up. If you want to hear more about that, Jonah Kuhl is going to be talking about that at 3:30 here. And so we're very much, looking at just trying to enable that next set of breakthroughs by generating the data sets, making sure they're AI ready, making sure that they're available, and that the generation of the data is not, what we're thinking about after we've done it, right? We're kind of going in with developing the data sets fit for purpose so that we can build the models around them.
Yeah, I fully agree with Shana. It's really, the data is everything. A joke, or maybe it's not so much of a joke in the machine learning space, is that 95% of the work in a machine learning project is actually just getting the data in the first place. And then building the algorithms and all of that fun stuff just comes after. I think that the work that's being done at the CZI Biohubs and across the industry is really focused on trying to uncover a lot of that information in the right way. And that's exactly what we're trying to do at Atomic as well, is find these areas where we can collect the necessary data at the right kind of scale. And another concept that I really agree with is that of this AI readiness. There's this interesting notion that when you talk in the drug discovery industry of, hey, these major pharmaceuticals are sitting on major wealths of data, right, significant data sets, and maybe they can leverage a lot of that. And I think that's true to a certain extent, but there's also the issue that a lot of that was not built with AI specifically in mind. It's missing the metadata, for example, or maybe it has some systematic biases in it. And so what we found is you almost need this new kind of approach, this new kind of thinking for how to get these kind of data sets, and it requires almost designing experimental assays that are whose primary purpose is to feed into these AI algorithms that train these kinds of large models.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to maybe say a few other things, but agree with what's been said in terms of data. I mean, a few points here. I agree that a lot of the data we have, especially in biotech, is not necessarily the right data for applying AI models to. And one of the things, again, that I would highlight, that we're thinking quite a bit about too, is in terms of, again, the scale-up issue. When you're generating data sets, what does it actually look like in the manufacturing facility? I mean, our manufacturing infrastructure, especially in the US, is not really set up to be gathering data that would then allow for actually generation of AI models on that data, right? So I think there's a need then for there to be significant investment, even updating infrastructure, right? To allow it to actually gather the data that is going to be useful to streamline processes ultimately with these types of models. And then coming even a bit further, I think something that's really important when we think about this from the US perspective is really developing a strategy and leveraging public-private partnerships, because the scale of the problem here is so massive, right, that it's really going to take coordination across different agencies, but also across different private sector companies, right, to really bring to mind and gather data sets that are going to be useful for this, all the way from R&D to the sort of scaled up infrastructure that we see in manufacturing.
Are you seeing anything happening there that you find gives you optimism? That
I think that there's a lot of discussion, and I think there's been a lot of good progress in terms of actually thinking through strategy. The challenges that I would just highlight again, what I specifically see in the U.S. is that actually executing long term on strategy that's been developed has been challenging, and so I think we see a lot of like starts and then stalls and then restarts again, which basically takes time and effort. And then the only other thing I would say is one of the big challenges I see is actually getting that investment in infrastructure advancement. It is something that I think the US really lags behind, especially when you look at other countries like China, right, which is oftentimes pointed to, but when you see the infrastructure that they're putting in place there, it is AI ready and it's very modern, and I think that that's something we have to be very aware of, right, is that, again, the data is what's going to drive this. And we need to be very strategic about making those investments, because it's not going to happen unless we have really coordinated efforts and strong strategy in public-private partnerships.
You work with a very specific and unique sort of data set in terms of natural products. So can you talk a little bit about what your needs are there?
Sure, yeah, and maybe I can give an example as well that's applying the challenges that we face and really getting fit-for-purpose data sets that allow you to make very generalizable models. One of the challenges that we have is that less than 1% of the molecules in nature are known, and what we're trying to build is the world's first chemical sequencer that can identify all of those unknown molecules. So you can imagine it can be challenging to build a model that can generalize into that remaining 99%. Fortunately, there's a lot of great research out there in the field of transformers and AI that have enabled us to do things like build an underlying foundation model where we have essentially taught computers, taught AI, the language of mass spectra, which is this laboratory technique, with over 1 billion unlabeled spectra, so we don't necessarily know what the individual compounds are, but we've been able to teach the AI how does mass spectra look, and then with a small set of less than 1% of nature of labeled examples where we're showing it, this is the mass spectra fingerprint for a specific molecule that we know the structure of, we can actually build models that can then generalize well to the remaining 99%.
Right. I guess beyond sort of the data infrastructure and the sort of investments and the type of planning that you're talking about there, sort of bringing it back to the moment, are there ways in sort of, whether it be a regulatory system or other sort of systems that need to be sort of tweaked immediately? The reason I ask this, I was talking backstage about 2 legal experts last week. They looked at AI-derived compounds and sort of found that, let me get this right, that found that labs tested fewer compounds in vivo and were significantly less likely to include like safety studies when they were going for their patent applications. And so they were making the case that this calls for some changes in terms of patenting. But so point being, like, are there sort of things like that you feel need to be or could be or would be beneficial to be sort of tweaked at the moment?
One item here, I think, this might be sort of like doubling down on something Christina just said before, but it's sort of that sort of buy-in on the long-term investment side of things specifically. And what I mean by that is not so much the number of funding dollars or et cetera, but it's more about like actually like a commitment to like seeing it through, because the industries like biotech are long-term games fundamentally, and it's like, you know, it takes 10 plus years to develop a therapeutic, and you know, company like many of us, right, developing sort of therapeutics early on, right, there's this large and long sort of timeline to get through. And so really having that sort of sustained commitment, like for example, like a plug for like the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotech, sort of recent recommendations in this space of like establishing this sort of broader sort of US strategy in the space, I think are really good things, and things that need immediate sort of buy-in and to push forward, because that's going to take time as well.
So it makes me think of CZI, and you obviously work on those 10-year timeframes of some of the initiatives that you have. What are some of the I mean, what are obviously some of the benefits of that, but also what are some of the potential drawbacks, I think, of sort of looking at it that way in a 10-year frame or longer term?
Yeah, so we do work on a long time scale, but it's really even longer than 10 years. So it's to the end of the century, but we also have a very ambitious goal that goes along with that timeline, which is by the end of the century to know how to manage, cure, prevent all human diseases. So you know, this is a lot to bite off, but we really believe in this. I mean, we have to be ambitious, right? If we do not set these goalposts at a certain place, we're never going to get there, right? And we're just going to kind of keep going along incrementally. So what that really drives us to do is to look for high risk, high reward approaches that allow us to try out things for the first time, to kind of get away from some of the more conservative approaches to funding research. I've been a beneficiary of that system for decades, and it served me very well, but at CZI we really do things differently, just trying to come at problems a completely different way. And that's really the draw towards AI as well, right? You know, if we can think differently about building models, go way above and beyond what's been done before. We also are very fortunate to have access to these amazing minds that have been part of the initial AI movement to kind of help us think about how to do AI for biology and to really get it right and build it big. You know, I think that's one thing I can say. I've been with CZI for a little bit more than 2 years, and we just kind of never shoot low. It's always swinging for the fences and just trying to do something that would be a true breakthrough. And I think that's kind of, in this space, that's really the mindset that we have to have.
In our last couple of minutes here, I wanted to ask about, I think sort of drill in a little bit on this idea of like, I think, will AI be like truly disruptive or another layer of like digital augmentation? Like how do you ensure that it's the former and not the latter from your perspective? I mean, you said some of the things that are needed, but I mean, I think even more broadly. Raphael, you want to start?
Sure. You know, I mean, I like to think of it as, you know, in the successful case here, AI will get integrated into all these different steps, right? It's kind of like, I don't know, like computers initially, right? It's like, obviously they're a huge deal, but they're integrated in our workflows at every single point. And now, I'm not going to say that that's going to happen overnight with AI in each piece, but these sort of statistical learning algorithms can help us in so many different ways, and it's really thinking through carefully, like, where does it make sense to apply it? Where are the capabilities lined up with the limitations in the space and applying it? Because AI, at the end of the day, it's a tool, right? It's a very useful tool, and I think it's a transformative one in many ways, but that doesn't mean that you should just blindly apply it either. It's really, you have to focus in, figure out where there's these sort of key sort of leverage points and hit those very specifically.
Christine, you want to add to that? You're nodding.
No, I mean, I agree, right? Yes, it can be really transform, right? And again, disrupt, I mean, it's going to transform and streamline a lot of processes, and it's really, again, identifying where it's going to make the biggest impact to really turn the needle, right? And make things possible that currently aren't possible because of time, because of failure rates, you know, and just because of the effort involved. But it is not immediate, right? gathering the data that is required to actually have it be fruitful is going to be a big challenge and going to require a lot of coordinated effort. And I think that's, maybe where there's some of the hype, which is like, this is going to just happen. We have to be very thoughtful about the problems that we apply it to, and we have to be very realistic about the amount of effort that it's going to take. And again, not just generating the data, but the investment in upgrading infrastructure to implement it the way we would want to and see that type of transformation.
Okay, so my last question for each of you. Assuming it's going to be truly transformative and disruptive, what is sort of your blue sky biggest question in the life sciences or even beyond where you think AI might be able to help sort of close a gap?
Sure, yeah, I can start. So I think the transformative moment that we need in life sciences, or at least in drug discovery, is being able to essentially reverse the trend that's been occurring with the discovery of new drugs, which we joke in the industry, we call it something called Arum's Law, which is just Moore's Law spelled backwards. And it's the idea that every 18 months, the cost of developing a new drug to the market doubles. And so we need to reverse that trend. And we're already seeing AI have such an impact in so many different areas. We need to see that trend happen in life sciences as well. And we need to be able to apply it in a way that actually makes medicines cheaper.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I would take, the example that's a complement to that from biomanufacturing, right? There's been a lot of interest, a lot of excitement about what we can make with biomanufacturing, different things that we can ferment, whether it's pharmaceutical ingredients, whether it's food, et cetera. And again, the failure rates that we've seen in the industry have really put a damper on that. And a lot of that happens not at the science stage, it happens at the scale-up stage. And so, the complement to that is, how do we make it so that instead of 95% of these things failing and it, again, the cost of doing it actually increasing every year to something where 100% success rate and the cost is actually, 1/10 of what it is today. Or even actually 1/50th, just because everything is successful on that first scale-up attempt. And you would really see that impact. And I think that you would then see the industry transform, right? There would be going from maybe 1 to 0 success cases to, tens to hundreds to thousands of success cases, and really building out a robust bioeconomy in the US and allowing us to maintain that leadership. I think that's critical.
Yeah, I mean, I just said something along the lines of AI as a tool. At the same time, I do think that there has already been sort of transformative impact of AI in bio. I think back to like this AlphaFold stuff, that literally won the Nobel Prize just a few months ago at this point. And it's taken these processes that take months or years, right? And hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars solving like single structures of molecules and boil it down to minutes or seconds. Now, if that's not cool and transformative, then I don't know what is. And it's just like, it takes time for that to percolate through the system for these kinds of advances, like, going through regulatory approval, et cetera. It takes a very long time, even with these breakthroughs, but that does not mean that it is not coming and that some of them have not already happened today.
Yeah, I would add to that by saying that, the transformative nature of this is really the transformation of biology. What we've been doing for decades is looking at one pathway at a time, one protein at a time. I'm not a biologist, I'm a chemist hybrid bioengineer. I watch the way the biologists work. So much of the data gets left on the table, especially now with omic level data sets. They go way beyond what the human mind can actually put together, right? So as we transform biology with AI and we have comprehensive models that take all of the data into account, not just a protein, not just a few pathways, then we have the ability to go after really hard problems. I mean, for me, it's that we stop treating advanced disease. That is the business that we are in right now, right? You get diagnosed with a chronic disease, you get diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer, and then we go to work trying to figure out what to do for you and to give you a few months of life. But if we really understand the biology of the human body at a very comprehensive level, we know how to get in there early. We know how to deal with the biology at the much more nascent stage of disease when we can actually do something about it. And I think that's what's there if we execute on this right.
That is a very good, hopeful note to end on. Thank you all so much. Thank you everyone for coming, and have a good rest of your afternoon and next few days here.
Thank you.
Thank you.